one of the things that I've really been aiming for, and I've been talking about this with as many men as I can, is like, my aim now is to be a father who is someone that can show that, so I can show my son what to do with flaws. That if I can live my life in such a way where I can say, yeah, I'm flawed, I'm not perfect, and model what it looks like to be a man who deals with his flaws head on and is able to talk about them and confront them and traverse them and shift through them. I think that that's incredibly valuable, because I think for most of us as men, and most dads that I talk to, they pressurize themselves. It's like, I got to be perfect for my boy. I got to be perfect for my kids. I have to like show them this pristine model of what it looks like to be a man. And it doesn't leave any room for the real cracks in the armor. And I think that that's such an integral part. What would you say is some of the main challenges that you see parents or fathers facing from culture, from society? Because I think we're living through this interesting time where more and more culture and society is influencing how parents parent, how they raise kids. And I think more and more there's this overlapping and intersection of society and culture having a very heavy influence on the family system. So I'm curious to get your take on that.
Yeah, this is a really, really big question. And I appreciate the question. And I'm going to try to really highlight some things that I think that I've seen and we see and that are important. But I think one of the biggest things is that, first of all, is that perception that you talked about. Man, I share that too. In fact, Connor, I don't know about you. This is the way I feel. But because I sit in this chair and I'm on this microphone and I coach other men, help other men be a more patient father, be a more affectionate, empathetic listener to their wives, better communication, better intimacy, be as physically, mentally, and emotionally fit as you possibly can, right? Create, teach kids about financial literacy, create generational wealth, all those things. I feel like the biggest imposter on the planet when I can't do those things myself, or I miss the mark. And I can beat myself up relentlessly. There isn't a day that goes by I don't make a mistake with my kids. There isn't a day that goes by I don't make a mistake with my wife. Sometimes I'm aware of it, and sometimes I have no clue I even did it, but it's there. And what I have to remind myself, and I think we have to remind all men out there, is that no one is perfect. I'm a very faith-based person, and last time I checked, there's only one perfect man that walked this earth, and we ain't him. But holding this standard that I am going to show my kids that this is what it looks like at all times, you're right. We're missing the mark because we're setting the bar so high, or we think we have to set the bar so high that they are now never going to live up to it. We've basically have set the bar so high for something that they might never even mentally or emotionally feel that they are going to attain themselves. But if we can show them, I'm a flawed, unfinished human being that's going to make mistakes, but I'm also going to continue to learn. I'm going to be better than I was yesterday. I'm going to apologize quickly when I make mistakes because I'm going to make them. I am going to recover and constantly be a student of this whole thing, and I'll never stop learning, ever. I think that's one of the greatest lessons we can teach. As far as like society goes, our kids, man, they're up against stuff, man, that you and I would have never dreamed of, obviously a lot of the political unrest that's going on. I don't care what side of the fence you sit on. It's unrest, right? But it's always been that way at the same time. The thing that I think concerns me the most, and I send my kids to public schools, and I send my kids to public schools here in St. Louis, which quite frankly, if I look at what I see on social media and in the news, we're pretty darn conservative. And I don't use conservative as a political term. I use it as in like, we don't really see a lot of the craziness that you see on the internet these days. But I think parents should be really, really, really involved with what is going on in their kids' school, the conversations that people are having, and also be very curious to have these open conversations with your kids. Like, so like, for instance, I know that there's a big spotlight on gender, right? And pronouns, and whether a kid can claim themselves at 7 years old if they like girls or boys and all this other stuff, which quite frankly, my view on that is that's absurd. That's absolutely absurd. I remember being 7 years old and all my friends, and we thought girls were gross, but that didn't make us gay, right? That made us little boys that would rather play in the mud than go talk to girls, right? I mean, so I think, and I use that as an extreme kind of funny example, but it's true. It's the same time. But I think you have to be a parent. Like, so like, for instance, my older boys, we have these conversations all the time. What's going on in your school? What are your teachers saying? Have they, forced this agenda or that agenda? Or are they quiet about the whole thing? And just being very open. I mean, there's a kid that's in my kids' class, and luckily this isn't common where we live, which is good. But my oldest is like, yeah, there's a kid in my science class who he's a cat. And I'm like, and I'm just like, well, what are your views on that? And my son's words are, you're not a cat. You're a man. You're a boy. You're not a cat. I don't care what you think you are. That is how you were made, period. And don't get me wrong. I am not against people who, are attracted to the same sex whatsoever. I have friends of mine who are gay. I have nothing against that. What I do have a problem with is when officials in power and in the school system force this agenda on our kids, saying this is what you are going to believe and this is what you're going to buy into. And if you don't, well, then you're this or you're that, or you're hate or you're racist or whatever. I don't buy that. I just don't. So that's just my view on it. And I think parents just need to be very open to have conversations about it and listen to what's going on. Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a charged topic, and, obviously media has contributed to that napalm fire.
Yeah.
Politicians have contributed to that napalm fire. And it's a very touchy subject, I think on the one hand, I'm very compassionate for people who, go through different experiences. And I'm very compassionate for those who, experience life different than I do. That's just how it is and how I think I was raised. I think one of the things that's been interesting is seeing that the education system has sort of been turned into a battleground, that to me is not what education is meant to be. It's not meant to be a battleground. And yet there's these ideological, very complex conversations, it's like, very complex conversations showing up within the education system for our kids. It's like, man, if your kid doesn't know algebra or if your kid, hasn't done division yet and multiplication tables, learning gender identities and reading these books where it's talking about, some of these books are pretty graphic. I think that's the interesting thing because I've kind of gone down this rabbit hole a bit to try and look at where I stand on this, because I haven't really talked about it, and I haven't really, just because I haven't been super informed, I don't really know what's getting taught in schools these days. I haven't been in school for a long time. I don't know what the education system is like in America, because I got educated in Canada. But now that I have a kid and I see everything that's happening on the news, I'm like, well, is it bad? Like, is it really that bad? Like, what's happening? And so it's interesting to have this conversation, because I can picture myself being a 7-8-year-old kid and hearing some of these things and have that be very confusing, and I do think that in some ways it is the parent and the family's responsibility to discern what values they're raising their children in. And for that to leak into the education system is challenging. Much like if you were trying to force a religious preference or belief, onto a
Right.
public school, right? I don't think that would fly very well. People wouldn't like
I
that.
agree.